my friends. Jumping up here to comment about the Miller hearing of Ethan Crumbley. I thought that by now it would be over, but the judge has kind of lapsed it, and it's gonna take part again on the 18th, or later this month. So it was going non-stop, and yes, I think it is going to resume next week. If you are wondering what a Miller hearing is a pre-sentencing hearing, and it's inspired in a court case, Miller versus Alabama, where it was determined that condemning kids under 18 years of age to a life without parole sentence constituted unusual and undue punishment. Having said that, the court system still reserve the right to apply or to hold Miller sentences in cases that are special or for 18 years old. Ethan Crumbley is not quite 18 years old, but he's getting there. And one of the things that they showed in the hearing that captured my attention was first and foremost, he already confessed to his crimes and declared himself guilty. He pleaded guilty. So this is only about sentences. This is not to establish his responsibility. Number two, although the mental illness or the insanity defense is off the table, the defense is trying to use the insanity defense or the fact that he is insane or that he has mental illness. They're trying to use that as an excuse to convince the judge not to sentence him to life without the possibility of parole. And I wanted to weigh in on this because one of the videos that they showed was Ethan Crumbley rocking himself somewhere in jail and saying, "Oh God, why didn't you stop me? Why didn't you stop it?" And as a pastor, and by the way, my name is Jenny McIntyre. If you've never been in this channel, I am a former practicing attorney. I am a pastor, a life and executive coach, and I like to comment on controversial topics and anything that has to do with the Word of God. And so one of the things that irked me was the presentation of this video where Ethan is screaming at God and saying, "Why didn't you stop me? Why didn't you stop me?" And it bothers me. It really does, that we ignore God for most of our lives, but that when something goes wrong, then we have no problem in pointing our finger at him and say, "It's your fault. I don't involve you in my life. I don't consult you, but it's your fault what I did. Why didn't you stop me?" For the same reason that God doesn't force you or me to approach him, for the same reason that he does not force anybody to worship him, anybody to follow him. He gives all of us the opportunity. He encourages us to follow him. He has a message of love for the humanity, but doesn't force us. And just as we like to have free will to make our own choices, we cannot tell God, "Okay, God, give me free will to make my own choices, but deliver me from the consequences of those choices." And this is one of the big problems with this world. And this is why it's so hard sometimes to accept suffering. And I think, as you guys know, I lost my husband in September of 2021. And it's very hard to deal with suffering, particularly if you think that the only place that exists is this earth right now. I know differently, but it is very hard to deal with suffering nonetheless. And one of the things that we have to understand is that with free will comes consequences for the exercise of that free will. And there are good people in this world, there are evil people in this world, and there are circumstances in this world that are caused by individuals, and sometimes the consequences are horrible. And sometimes people, like the people that were shot in this massacre, are innocent bystanders that suffer as a result of poor consequences. So it is not God's fault that Ethan Crumbley was completely unsupervised and was able to pull a weapon. It is not God's fault that his parents were too busy doing other stuff. I'm not going to point my crooked finger and tell you guys what they were doing, but you can find it online everywhere, and it's in the court, whether, their extramarital affairs and buying horses and doing politics and, posting on social media how proud they were that they were giving their son a gun, although they knew of his mental illness. And they had a lot of time to do a lot of things but not for their child. That's not God's fault. Parenting matters. It matters. We are not supposed to have kids and just let them go and assume that video games and TV are going to supervise our children. This kid was killing birds. He had a diary with very, very macabre entries that talk about how he wanted to kill people, that talk about how he was not like everybody else, that he had no problem killing people, that he couldn't wait to kill people. He had a lot of things. He was watching stuff that was incensing. Guys, that is not God's fault. That is not God's fault. We cannot have it both ways. We cannot say, God, talk to the hand as it relates to living my life. I live my life as I want to live my life. But you better prevent the consequences of my actions, the consequences of me living away from you, from coming into fruition. We cannot have it both ways. And so why? Why didn't God stop the massacre in Michigan? Because there's evil in this world. And because Ethan's heart was not shepherded by his parents. And as a consequence, he developed habits and lack of sensitivity, and he went unsupervised. And there was nothing that those that were surrounding him were trying to help. Even the school principals and authorities called these parents at school, and they said, we don't have time for this. We gotta go. Now, Ethan knew enough to talk to other people, to have a diary. He could have spoken to his school principals. He was in the office of the school principal. He could have said, I really need help. He chose not to. I do not say that he is 100% responsible. We know that kids, until they're like 20, 21, their brain is not fully developed. But he had enough sense to distinguish between right and wrong, as his diary entries indicated. So he cannot blame God. And Ethan's parents cannot blame God either, because they were negligent in their responsibilities. Now, I'm a mother, and I don't get it right all the time. None of us does. I work with teenagers and young people, and I always tell them, I said, parents are kids that grew up and had other kids. So cut us a break, because we're not going to get it right every time. It's not a matter of getting it right every time. It's a matter of exercising discretion and do our very best to be there for our kids, to be present for them. And it's to not allow schools or TV programs or video games to play the role that only a parent can play. Let's make time to pay attention to our kids. Let's make time to build a relationship with them. It takes time, but we sign up for this job of being parents. So we might as well follow through. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot more horrible things happening. And that is the problem of humanity. We are not willing to accept responsibility for our actions. We are not willing to embrace. Parents want somebody else to raise their kids for them, and it cannot be. Parenting matters. It mattered in this Ethan Crumbley's case. It matters so much that for the first time in an unprecedented move, Ethan's parents are indicted now and are going to have to face consequences. And you know, I'm not perfect, but it's about time. Parents, it needs to start hurting them personally, so that we start paying more attention to what we're doing with our children. We're not going to be able to avoid these things all the time, but we need to be more intentional about how we parent our children, because parenting matters. And not all disasters can be prevented, but most of them can, if we pay more attention and if we embrace our responsibility of parents better. Otherwise, look at the background of every person that has committed a crime. Look at their family background, and you're going to see a direct correlation between their lives of crime and how they were taken care of when they were children. It's almost a formula. So parenting matters. Let's see what happens with the Miller session when it goes back, and I will come back to comment on it. I love you guys. This was Pastor Jenny.